Hello and welcome to our webinar today on the topic of the moment, the coronavirus, and more specifically, employee communication in the age of Corona and COVID-19. So we welcome you to today's event. And my name is Bob Randall. As you can see on the slide here today, I'm a professor at the College of St. Scholastica in their MBA Leadership and Change program, as well as CEO of Transcend Engagement. And again, today we're going to be talking specifically about the employee communication in these times of change and isolation. So a couple of housekeeping items. We have a chat box if you have questions along the way, or we'll have a little time at the end. I've got about 15 to 20 minutes of content. So we'll have plenty of time at the end to entertain any questions as well. So I'll look forward to talking to you a little bit about communication in times of crisis, in times of change, in times of isolation. Very unprecedented that we would have all of these things happening at the same time. The fact that we have a lot of change, that's obviously happened in organizations quite commonly, that we have a crisis that has happened before, but to have that combined with isolation that people are invoking because of health reasons, that's definitely a new twist into the mix of a situation that we're dealing with today. So, of course, what's happening now, just to kind of be empathetic and thoughtful about what people are going through. Obviously, kind of just being empathetic toward people's concerns that they have for themselves, for their loved ones, is creating a lot of stress in people's lives. There's also a lot of economic distress and fear that's occurring with people as well, wondering, well, is my job safe? Is my income still going to be coming in? I still have bills to pay. What if I do get sick and those hospital bills start to run up? Am I going to have insurance? There's just a tremendous amount of uncertainty with what's going on with people. And then, of course, at the same time, we're isolating ourselves with social distancing and being separate from people increases the stress and loneliness that people are experiencing as well. And for those that are still working, they might be working from home, or if they are going in and they're on the front lines of what's happening, they're having to practice new things to keep themselves safe. So there's just a lot going on. And obviously, just to kind of put ourselves into the shoes of employees and what's happening with them, I think is a good place to start. And just to recognize the fact that communication now is ever more important than it has been even in the past. It's always one of the top drivers of engagement with employees, but I think it's probably rocketed right to the very top because of what's going on. And it's really an essential need for people right now to stay in tune with what's happening, to hear from their leaders, and to be able to express themselves and stay connected. So what we're really going to talk about over the next couple of slides here are really four areas because communication is really a multifaceted process. So we're going to start with the role of senior leadership when it comes to communication in times of crisis. Then we're going to talk about the role of the supervisor in communication. We'll also talk about the importance and need for having bottom-up communication, so leaders and supervisors can hear from their employees and let them express themselves. And then just the fact that it's really important, especially in times of isolation, that we have some kind of social connections at work. Again, that's also a driver of engagement with employees in normal times, but especially when we're isolating ourselves, there's a lot of change going on. It's an even more important process for employees to be able to connect with each other at work as well. So let's start with senior leadership. What is their role and what's a good way for them to think about communicating in these unprecedented times? Well, the first thing is to make sure that they're communicating frequently. I'm sure in normal times, senior leaders are probably taking maybe time to do a weekly update or maybe a monthly or even a quarterly town hall meeting. In normal times, that's pretty typical. But in today's environment, senior leaders need to be communicating very frequently. We see this at the national level. We have daily White House briefings with the president and other leaders giving us updates on a daily basis. That doesn't normally happen, and it's happening now because things are changing so rapidly. And so in organizations and companies, things are also changing rapidly, and we need to be able to hear, employees need to be able to hear from their senior leaders on a very regular basis. If not daily, there should be a couple of updates throughout the week. And then it should be direct. So top leaders need to know, and this is just a reminder that especially in times of crisis or times of a tremendous amount of change, employees have a need to hear directly from the top person. This is not something to outsource to others. Certainly the top person might end up kind of leading a meeting and then turning it over to other subject matter experts, but showing that they're front and center in the middle of this and taking it seriously and having that direct communication with employees is incredibly important. And then making sure that they maintain and let everyone know that they're accessible to employees. This can be done through email, through chat boxes. I'll show you some examples of that here as we go through the presentation. But you might think, well, how could the leaders, be accessible if they have thousands of employees in the organization, for example? Well, that is actually done even in regular times. I know employees, for example, at the company of Tesla, where Elon Musk is the CEO. He responds directly to employee emails on a regular basis. They have 45,000 employees in the company. And of course, I'm sure if he gets overwhelmed, he'll bring his team in to help him with a response system. But just the fact that he says he's accessible and he'll do his very best to respond shows a lot of care for the employees that want to hear directly from him. So that's also an important piece. And then as far as crafting a message for employees, I think there are a couple of key points to keep in mind. One is to make sure that the message itself is authentic and it's realistic. So it's coming directly from the leader, and they should make sure that their personal authentic pieces are part of that message. And that they're also expressing a sense of hope, making sure that they're not expressing a false sense of hope. They're not there to persuade. Oftentimes leaders get into positions because they're very persuasive and very effective at that. Employees don't want to be sold a bill of goods, but they want a realistic message, but also one that also shows them a little bit of hope. Eventually this virus is going to go away. And I think people need to continue to hear that. And our job right now is to make sure that it goes away quickly and with the least amount of negative effects to it. But there is going to be hope at the end of the tunnel, and people certainly need to know that leaders are thinking about that. And then, of course, saying, the fact that we're all in this together. This isn't like you're out on an island, you're out on your own. We're still part of an organization. We still have values. We still have a culture. And those values and that culture are more important now than they ever have been. So the fact that everybody can pull together during this time of crisis and help each other, I think is an important tone to set with messaging. And then making sure that the leader demonstrates some empathy, that the leader, he or she, is thinking about employees, what their concerns are, what they're dealing with in their home life, in their personal lives, and of course, from a work standpoint. So that they demonstrate that they can, at least to some degree, put themselves in the shoes of the common employee that they are responsible for as the leader of the organization. And then a sense of vulnerability. So leaders that are able to share their feelings are ones that people are going to believe and they're going to trust, and they're going to be more likely to follow. So that is also a very important aspect of what the message looks like. So we put together an example. We've seen some leadership emails go out to employees that I think we try to incorporate into a best practice. I do want to, at this point, also let you know that for those of you attending the webinar today, you will get a copy of these emails. So you'll have, if you want to take this example and tweak it for your own organization or use it with your clients, you'll have that opportunity. But here's an example where, you know, the leaders helping the employee know that they have some personal responsibility. They're empowering the employee to stay safe. These are some things I want to reiterate that we're hearing from medical experts that you can do to have safe practices. And that's obviously a very important part of getting through this particular crisis. And then secondly, what's the company doing to make sure that they're doing their very best to keep employees safe? What are the practices that they are employing, policies that they've tweaked, emphasizing that type of thing? And then how might this affect the business and people's jobs? We may not know the full answer to that, but I think just the fact that we are thinking about it as leaders is really, really important to acknowledge that. So whatever they can share with that and give real-time information is very important. Because as we know, if we're not communicating, employees are going to come up with some of their own conclusions. And we want to make sure that the leader of the organization is at least shaping the narrative that's occurring. And then finally, making sure that the leader's being empathetic, they're emphasizing teamwork, we're in this together, and make sure that they don't forget to thank employees for all of their efforts and everything they're doing to help the organization get through this. And then again, being accessible. So making sure they have some line of communication to allow employees to reach out to them if needed. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit to the direct supervisors. The direct supervisors have a very important role to play with their employees as well. We know in normal times, the direct supervisor accounts for over 50% of an employee's engagement with that company. And certainly in times like this, they're going to really remember how their supervisor reacted and how they worked through the situation. And so I would recommend, typically in a situation like this, that the direct supervisor takes on a servant leadership approach in general. They really need to make themselves a resource to employees, recognizing that employees have a lot of needs, they might have a lot of questions, and that the supervisor has a persona that they're really there to help. And how can they be a resource to assist with the employee? And then also making sure that they have frequent check-ins with the employee as well. If they're used to checking in with an employee once a week or once a month, they need to ramp that up and maybe even do it daily or multiple times a day just to make sure the employee is getting through what they need to do in the right way. And then hosting department meetings, getting the group together, kind of creating that sense of camaraderie and teamwork is also an important part of the puzzle. So just some more specifics. Again, you'll have a copy of this, but I have found that with a lot of supervisors, they oftentimes get promoted in their position because they're great, dedicated employees. It might be subject matter experts, but oftentimes they don't have a lot of training on how to handle direct employee and kind of the human aspect of leadership and supervision. So these are really good reminders and pointers for them to really go out and practice what it is to be a great boss to somebody. As I mentioned, the servant leadership is just making sure the employee knows that you care about them, that you're accessible to them, and you're using questions to really find out how you can be a resource for them. And then those frequent check-ins, again, these should be, at least in times of great change occurring, I would recommend daily. And this is where the supervisor might kind of have a checklist of items in their head that they want to go through with the employee, but all sort of in the form of inquiry and questioning. How are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help? What obstacles and challenges are you facing? Those are the types of things that an employee will really appreciate that their boss asked them. They cared enough to reach out to them. I'm a professor at a college, and I had my dean reach out to me on Friday just to do a quick 3-minute check-in by phone. How are you doing? I mean, that was the main theme of the entire check-in, and I'll really appreciate that, or I really do appreciate that he did that, and I'll remember that for a long, long time. And then in the department meetings, again, this is a way to kind of bring everybody together, kind of a esprit de corps, where you know, we not only dwell on like what's going on change-wise with everybody and acknowledging that, but can we talk about some good things that happened? We just had a company meeting this morning with our whole group. We did it by Zoom, and we went around and talked a little bit about like, well, what are you watching on Netflix? You know, so we tried to bring a little bit of, you know, we kind of dealt with the day-to-day issues that we typically do, but we also brought in a little bit of the personal aspect with how people are handling things. And I would encourage I like the round robin approach too. So just kind of going around the room and having people share with what's in front of them, maybe some obstacles that they're running into, that type of thing. So that helps create a lot of trust among employees and a good group dynamic, and know that people are in it together. So now we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about the importance of bottom-up communication. This is just where companies overall need to make sure that there are open channels. So, you know, are there emails? Is there one-on-one? How are they able to express themselves? And I don't think that just having an open door policy is enough. I mentioned earlier that reaching out to employees and encouraging them to express themselves is really, really important. But even more important, I think this is a really interesting time, and employees are really going to understand what their culture is really like. In a lot of corporate cultures, we say, you know, the employees are number one, or they're an important asset. Well, we're really going to find out now. So if you're looking at all this and you're like, oh, I don't know if our leader is going to take time to do that, or my supervisor is going to take time to do that, that's going to be a marker for people. When people are going through a tremendous amount of change and a crisis is occurring, we say that that is a lifetime marker for them, and they're really going to know where they stand. Are they really a priority? Is the CEO really looking at employees as a group of people that, you know, he's accessible to or she's accessible to, and really values what their input is going to be? Now's the time to really walk the walk. So other forms of bottom-up communication, again, I would recommend inviting employees to respond to an email. We use that in the example, for example, that we had earlier from the CEO. We have an example of a leadership chat box here on the right. So a lot of communication portals that companies use, especially if you have an online system, can be really effective to give the employee the opportunity to correspond in a chat box with the CEO. So again, the CEO is not going to sit at their computer all day long responding to these, but they're probably going to get a few. And the fact that employees can see the communication going back and forth between common employees and upper leadership can be very, very powerful. That's one example. And I'll show you here in a second how a communication portal works if you happen not to have one. And then I also recommend a town hall meeting at times of change like this, which may have a little bit of information in it, but I would open it up more for a listening session. So the leadership can hear from employees. How are you doing? How are you dealing with this? And there's a way for them to share that in a town hall format. I think can be really powerful. We have the communication tools. We're on Zoom today. Other companies use other systems. But there is a way to connect employees electronically today that can be very effective for that. And then lastly, I want to touch on social networking. We all know that having social connections at work is an important part of engagement in regular times. It's going to be even more important as we isolate ourselves through social distancing, and as we're all collectively going through all of these changes together. Social networking will help build trust. We know that employees that can help personalize the workspace end up building trust over time, because now we see each other as human beings rather than maybe adversaries or as a more transactional relationship. If we can turn that transactional relationship into, oh, I know Sue over there, she posted pictures of her dog, I have a dog who's similar. As silly as that sounds, it helps humanize the workplace. And as maybe Sue and I have to work through an issue down the road, we have a relationship from which we can build upon, rather than just knowing Sue as the director of finance. Instead, it's a more personal relationship, and that's why we know through many studies and research that trust really builds when we personalize the workplace. And a great way to do that is through social networking. And of course, and I'll show you here in a second how we can do that even in an online environment, but that helps build teamwork. And again, as people build connections at this time of social distancing, it'll be super, super important. So one way you can do that is with the communication portal. And I would say some portals are a little more static, where it's like a top-down approach to communication. Those are not effective for social networking, but there are some that are much more conducive to having bottom-up and social connecting. So I'll show you an example of one that we have. And if yours does this too, you might even think more proactively about how this could happen more effectively. But we'll work with clients to create a portal somewhat like this. Each of these boxes are what we call widgets. They're very easy to turn on and off. But this is an opportunity. Again, I mentioned the chat box before. That's how this works here, where the CEO, Sally, can correspond with employees and the questions that they have along the way. And that can be done in a very public format. Any employee can go in and post something. And you can have safe checks in place if you're worried that some employees might post something that is inappropriate. We can have an approval process in place for that as well. And these widgets do all kinds of different things. We have one that's just for quick links. So the traditional intranet that companies have will typically be set up just for this part. But you can see we can add a lot of extra functionality to a system to help make it more interactive with employees as well. So this would be where the CEO can actually post stories. So if they have communications they want to put out there, they invite employees to comment on what they're posting. Again, a nice string of communication can happen there. Or any leader can go out and post a story like that. Here's a more personalized widget over here where it's like, hey, we're all working from home now. Show us your workspace. So here are some fun things like read the sign, kids, like do not disturb, mom or dad's at work, or my home internet is sort of here and there, here, bang your head here. Again, this is just a way for employees to post different things onto a widget like that. And then we can also, if we get an employee file from you, we can automate some of the other nice things if you want to post like who's having birthdays or service anniversaries, that type of thing. So there's a lot. I'm not going to go into any more on this, but if you're interested, we're offering 6 months free to help employers get through this time where employees are working from home or there's social distancing, where they can use this site for free. We can get that set up relatively quickly with just about any company. So we invite you to contact us if you're interested in that. So in summary, again, we talked about the multifaceted approach, the role that senior leadership has with communication, that they need to be out in front, direct, authentic, and empathetic. Supervisor communication, where again, they need to have more frequent check-ins with employees, bring their departments together, be a servant leader. The bottom-up communication is very important, so employees have an outlet to express themselves, and then being able to connect to each other through like a communication portal or town hall meetings or other ways is also very, very important in this time of isolation. So that's sort of a summary of what we had prepared for you today. I did want to, before we open it up for questions, I wanted to alert you to another webinar we have coming up on Thursday called the Virtual Employee Engagement and Appreciation webinar. So we'll talk about how to make sure that you can still employ an appreciation program in a virtual environment, given the situation that we're dealing with today. And here's our little advertisement for Transcend Engagement. The different things that we do around recognition, communication. We talked a lot about performance management. We have an online store, survey tool, and we do training and development for clients as well. So let's see if there are any questions from anybody. And feel free to type one into the chat box if you're interested. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions at this time. So I will close things now and just say I hope everybody stays safe, everyone stays healthy, and thank you again for attending today's webinar. We will get a copy out to you. And by the way, we're also recording this as well. So we'll make that available out on our social media channels. Thank you again.